The heralded bipartisan infrastructure bill passed by Congress in 2021 promised to bring high-speed internet to America's most rural communities. But what if I told you that the process to this point and moving forward is not quite as straightforward as it may seem? So what are the challenges in the way of bringing high-speed internet to these communities? When can we expect it to arrive? And what's the impact for our communities? Anthony Hennen is a journalist for the Center Square who's been covering this issue, and he joins us today to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. In 2021, Congress passed the heralded bipartisan infrastructure bill, and one of the provisions was to provide high-speed internet, broadband infrastructure to America's most rural communities. This is in every state across the country, including in our home state here of Pennsylvania. But 2 years later, we still haven't seen that internet. So what's the holdup and what does the path forward look like? Anthony Hennen is a journalist for the Center Square. He's been on this program before. He's been covering this issue, so he joins us again tonight. Anthony, welcome back to Face the Issues.
Good to be here.
Good to have you back. Let's start. I mean, broadband is such a technical term. I mean, what we're really talking about here, right, is high-speed internet access.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, this is also, as interwoven as the internet has become and as broadband has been, this is becoming more and more of a necessity, whether you're in a city, whether you're out in the countryside. And the root problem here is making sure everyone's getting plugged in. And so all this money coming in from the federal government and all these other sources, that's the goal here, right?
Okay.
Getting everyone connected no matter where you are, making sure not only that you can stream Netflix, you can play video games or whatever else, but just making sure that fire departments are connected,
Sure.
Police departments are connected, these small businesses who rely on some basic access to being able to get someone on the phone or talking on the internet, making sure that they're all plugged in and everyone can grow.
Yeah, so I mean, let's just kind of dive in on that. This is much more, I mean, to your point, I think we think high-speed internet and we often hear Netflix, streaming, things like that, gaming. But there's a lot more that the internet is used for. One of the things you just brought was EMS services. And so this is also, I mean, the fact that we have communities that don't have this broadband, this is in some ways a security risk.
Yeah, I mean, this really, it just cascades when you get into it. I mean, you talk to any rural community in Pennsylvania, just talk to the local police there or EMS services. I mean, this isn't even necessarily being able to be highly connected at all times. Some places like up in north central Pennsylvania, they've struggled to make sure they maintain 24/7 phone service.
Oh, wow.
So, when you look at a lot of this stuff, a lot of this network is decades old or more. There's constant outages. So this really comes down to not only businesses or people at home, but making sure that basic government services are provided. And that's kind of the big main challenge that we're looking at here.
Other big impact, of course, is schools. Increasingly, you really can't do school without internet access anymore. And so there are districts that don't have that access. Some of them even going to private companies to try to get that access quicker, get that infrastructure in place quicker.
Yeah, I mean, this is, when you start looking into broadband and what it's used for, and what you hear about when you hear complaints from people, I mean, you find more and more issues here. And so there's a ton of federal money coming in, but at the same time, this is happening in every single state, and this is all supposed to be spent over the next 5 years.
Okay.
So not only are we looking at these big challenges that we're vaguely aware of, a lot of the groundwork that's been happening since the bill has passed is basically identifying what locations we have to address, identifying, who do we have who can build this out, but also thinking about workforce development, because there's a potential threat of labor shortages, because every state will be needing this, and companies are going to go where they can get the funds, but also where it seems like their networks might be built out more, or where they see some more long-term promise. So there's just a lot of factors going in, and how this money is going to be spent is the big question coming up.
Let's talk about that bill. It's the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's a multi-trillion-dollar bill, 2,700 pages, which for people like me who worked in Congress is kind of just batting your eye. Now, a lot of the bill is not about broadband infrastructure. So broadband infrastructure is one piece in this large omnibus infrastructure bill. And to your point, they divide this funding throughout the states. And so Pennsylvania is due about $1.2 billion in federal funding for this. Again, federal funding for this. The way it's broken down is that we will get the funding, but the state has to figure out what to do with it and to where it goes. So it's not the federal. It's not when this comes through that there's going to be internet. It's that when it comes through, there's going to be funding. Yes. And then the legwork needs to be done to get the internet up and running.
Yes, that's where the fun begins, essentially. I mean, it's not only 1.2 billion. This is talking about the BEAD program, which I believe is the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment. I believe it's so many acronyms, but that's going to be about 1.12 billion. There's another fund that's roughly, I think, $250 million for kind of capital investments. There's a third fund, so we're talking probably overall closer to $2 billion for Pennsylvania in federal funds, and this will all be funneled through the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority, which is where these telecom companies will apply for grants to go and actually build this out.
Okay, so that's how it works. We got the federal money comes in, it goes to the state, to this agency. Then companies are going to be able to bid for a portion of that for that work. And so these companies are not government agencies. These are private companies that do this kind of business. They're going to bid for that funding to go into these communities and build out this infrastructure.
Yeah, and then this gets complex because each state is doing this a little differently. Like with Pennsylvania, just looking at the scoring rubric for these grants of what is where the funding is going to go, where there's been already complaints about that process, where Pennsylvania is not as transparent about how it's weighing each category in this rubric of how they're grading things compared to other states who may tell these bidders, like, hey, this is what we're concerned about for rural, this is what we're focusing on for urban. I think Pennsylvania is not necessarily unique in this. Every state you're going to have these companies complaining in one way or another about something. Nothing is perfect, but that is some of the early feedback we've been hearing about.
Let me ask you about where this is going to go. We'll get into this conversation about the map here in a little bit, but the idea here is for us to be able to reach, to your point earlier, rural areas that don't have this access yet. Is it right to assume that areas that large cities, for example, Philadelphia, your hometown, or not hometown, but where you live now, that has successful broadband infrastructure, that they would be not part of this funding in this building, that is really targeting areas that lack it?
So not quite. When you look at the bill, it's talking about unserved and underserved areas. Unserved is where there's no providers. Underserved is where you might have some, but the service isn't necessarily great, or there's just one person. But this does not only apply to rural areas. This is some growing suburban areas. This is some urban areas where you don't necessarily have as many people plugged into broadband. So I think a lot of this attention will go to these urban areas, rural areas, simply because there's so many locations that are not plugged in. But you'll see this funding every county, every area of the Commonwealth. But it's also, when you look at how we've defined these, I believe the FCC data that they updated recently and released these updated maps, overall, I believe there's something like 270,000 unserved locations in Pennsylvania, and another about 60,000 underserved locations. So this is huge, and it goes. You look at this map, it's all red with dots. I mean, there's very few areas where you see completely plugged in, no problem. There's a lot of areas that qualify for this money.
Okay. Well, let's talk about timeline. Now, you said earlier this is supposed to be about a 5-year project, projection out. Do we expect, or from what you've seen, I know you've talked to a lot of residents that live in these areas, is there an expectation that in these 5 years we're going to see this infrastructure bill and high-speed internet coming through?
I mean, that's what the federal government is promising. So take that with a grain of salt or with as much trust as you would like. When we're looking at this, basically with the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority, by the end of July, they essentially have a consulting firm working on basically a roadmap for these 5 years coming up. So end of July, that should be turned in to the Broadband Authority, and then I believe the timetable is about October, November, they'll kind of finalize that, and then we'll kind of start to see what the next 5 years will look like as far as them accepting or finalizing applications, figuring out where to send this money. So I believe, within a year or so, we should start seeing the first bit of this money, this infrastructure actually getting built out. Or that is the plan so far, at least.
Is there a sense, I mean, you hear some critics of this say this, is there a sense of that's a long time? I mean, we're talking about the need for this. And 5 years is a long time if we can't keep phone lines in certain areas up. That this really seems to be being dragged out in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is the case we have with every federal government program,
Sure.
right? Where there's so much money coming in here. There's an already established process you have to go through. There's all these checks, and just also there's a lot of groundwork of this to be done. Just simply identifying where these things need to go, figuring out what the priorities should be, trying to make sure you're being at least relatively fair or have some sort of transparent process for how to roll this money out. This is so much money going out all over the span of 5 years, especially for the need you see in some of these areas.
Yeah.
It will always look slow, but that is also the nature of the beast we're talking here. And simply being able to account for all this money and make sure we're not just sending this money out to people who, big promises, but they don't necessarily have the expertise in this. They don't have the labor lined up for this. There's also some cases where a lot of these areas, you need to be prepared to build this infrastructure out, getting simply permitting issues out of the way, getting rights of way for putting up poles or attaching cables to poles. There's a lot that goes into this.
Yeah.
It's always going to seem slow. I do not have the expertise to rule on whether this is moving as it should, whether it should be slower, whether it should be faster. That's out of my expertise here.
Yeah, oftentimes the funding part of it might be the easiest part of it, and it's the legwork that makes everything a lot harder.
Yes, I say, right now we're just kind of getting past the point of we've identified a lot of these locations, we've heard a lot of feedback. There's still ongoing public meetings and sessions to get more feedback about what the problems will be. So hopefully we'll soon be done with that part and start moving ahead.
Okay. We're going to go to break. Anthony, when we come back, I want to talk about some of the potential problems that we're seeing. We hinted at the map earlier, but some of the other issues of roadblocks that we might have. So don't go away. I'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website for more information. Visit lighthousetv.org to stay connected. There you can find out what's currently on the air and coming up. How to watch in your area on cable, satellite, broadcast, or streaming devices. Watch past programs or our live stream. Follow us on social media and learn more about the station, our hosts, and our programming. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Anthony, thank you again for joining us. Imperative topic, one that can get a little bit technical. Let's talk about some of the potential challenges or the challenges that we are seeing right now with this broadband bill having passed, and now as we start heading into the construction, the infrastructure part of it, and eventually the goal here to deliver this high-speed internet. Spotlight PA, an investigative journalist group here in Pennsylvania, recently put out a piece called "What's Next" as Pennsylvania prepares to spend $1.2 billion on broadband. And one of the first challenges they talk about is this idea of the map. And one of the things they said is we still don't know exactly who can't get broadband. Talk to us about this map. What are they referring to?
Yeah, so this is essentially looking back at the FCC and kind of what they provide, how they define what counts as broadband speed. We're essentially relying on these recently updated FCC maps of telling us where we need to go. There's a big push around the beginning of the year of trying to identify these places. So the maps are better. They've added, I don't want to say exactly how many, but we've added tens of thousands of locations lacking service onto the Pennsylvania map. But that's essentially where the ball gets rolling. So it's great that we have these maps, we can use it. The problem here is we don't know what we don't know here. If someone who doesn't have internet did not hear about the FCC updating the maps, if they're not necessarily involved, or if they don't get emails from their representatives, they don't necessarily know that they were even being missed, or if they were marked as being served but they're not served, they aren't necessarily up on the process for fixing that. So hopefully this is not going to be 100%. It's just the nature of the beast here. But hopefully this is at least a good start, and we really cover a lot of the clear issues we have. But even if we spend this money perfectly, there's going to still be a lot of dark spots.
And this map is updated online?
Yeah, so there's essentially, the FCC had a number of meetings and processes, but then you would go online and you would file this.
Right.
And you could do this from home. You could also, there were different groups setting up trying to help people through the process, but that's essentially how it's updated across the US.
So if the resident doesn't have internet access, that could also be challenging just to mark it.
That is a fundamental problem, yes. I mean, you see this even, it feels like half of the broadband meetings I watch, if I'm live streaming them, if I'm not able to go to them, it seems like the broadband stream itself is of low quality. When you have these meetings in these rural areas about poor service, a lot of people just don't hear about them. But even with that in mind, a lot of people show up. And one of the problems that we see here, whether it's through the FCC map updating, whether it's through a complaint investigation through the Public Utilities Commissions or the Office of Consumer Advocate, even if people know that they're lacking access or they have this poor service, it's hard for them to report this simply because they can't access it at home or they can't necessarily call in anywhere.
Yeah. The David Glass is a Clearfield County Commissioner, said that residents had zero awareness and the map was not user-friendly for the average person. Just kind of articulating what you just said about some of the challenges in getting this up to speed and making sure we know where the broadband needs are. Another one of the challenges that's been raised, and you've talked about this, is the physical infrastructure problem. You hinted at this in the last segment. How much construction are we looking at, and what is this idea? I mean, there's been conversation, you talked about it, about different companies bidding on it that could be problematic.
Yeah, I mean, it runs the gamut, essentially, because the way this process is going, it's as far as what technology they'll use to expand broadband, it's agnostic. I mean, any sort of, if we're doing some wireless section here, if we're doing fiber optics, I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter the manner of the transmission here. Okay. So there's a lot of different things that go into that. One thing that stands out is just kind of these basic permitting issues of getting rights of way, of getting permission or from local officials, from state officials, from federal officials to just attach wire to a pole running through. And this is one of those things where there's so many different processes or there's so many permits that you need that things get tied up. I think this is one of those kind of lurking issues that we see, telecoms, that we see from renewable energy development, fossil fuel development. We have such a decades-long process of trying to build this stuff out, protecting the environment, making sure that local residents aren't overly burdened by this stuff. It gets very complicated and it can really slow down the works. So something as simple as there's already a pole up here. If we could attach the wire to this pole, we could save time, we could save effort, we could save money. It's never so simple. So I think that's one of the things haunting in the background of all this. It's not something that's intentionally caused by a problem. Right. This is just how these things are built up, and there's no easy way necessarily to get around them. So how that will be done, that's a big question here, even aside from labor or workforce issues.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, this is why so many people get frustrated with government. Yes. I mean, the bureaucratic red tape proverb that we talk about is this, that something, as you explained it, sounds so straightforward. Here's the pole, it's in, we don't need to redo it, we just need to attach a wire to it. That might not be able to be done, or if it is, it might take a long time for us to clear all the hurdles to get that. You mentioned at the end there the potential labor issues and a labor shortage. Would there be a labor shortage? What are the problems that we potentially have with that?
Yeah, so I think there's two things to consider here. One is, again, this is happening in every state across the United States at the same time, spending this money over 5 years. So there's going to be a high demand for labor for this, for splicing crews, for people putting up the lines, I mean, all sorts of different things. When we're looking at the latest meeting of the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority in July, they talked about, they had estimates of it'll be about 5,000 to 7,000 people will be needed to build this out. Whether it could be more, whether it could be less, who knows. But there's going to be a problem finding these people, especially when you're competing against Ohio, New York, Maryland, New Jersey. So that's one part of it. And making sure there's a way to quickly train, high school graduates, college graduates, people who want to pivot, finding ways to streamline that or make that quick. I think that's going to be a big thing, a very big issue. That hopefully, if we don't figure out, some other state does, and we can quickly copy that and develop it. But another issue that's a little more unique to Pennsylvania is the prevailing wage requirement. That essentially, unions tend to support this because you get higher wages for workers. Unionized employers oppose this because it drives up costs and can get complicated. Essentially, what that means for Pennsylvania is when we're comparing to states that don't have a prevailing wage requirement, like Ohio, like Maryland, costs could be 20 to 30% more, at least according to some estimates I've seen. And the result of that is you might have more of these companies or more labor. If they're doing a dozen states and Pennsylvania and maybe one or two other states have this requirement, they're probably going to be more willing to go to other states to do this work. And also, when we're talking about all this money flowing in, those higher costs also means that we may not necessarily build out as much broadband coverage as other states. So I think on the labor side, when you're looking at that, those are the two big issues that, whether this will be a minor issue, maybe we'll get lucky with this, but it's not clear.
To your point, there's an amount of funding allocated for this. So when that funding runs out, it runs out.
We have one shot at this. I will be very surprised if we see another extra $1 billion rolling out from the federal government for this. But yeah, if we don't use this money wisely, it's gone, and it's a missed opportunity. And if other states near us do this very well or in a much more competent manner, it's going to look terrible for us. And it's also going to be, I think it's another one of those little cuts that pushes people to, do I want to stay in Pennsylvania, or do I want to move to North Carolina? Do I want to move out west? There's a lot of those population pressures, and this could be one extra thing.
Especially if it's one of those things where we don't get the broadband to everywhere we'd like to get it for wage cost or whatever else it might be. If that money is being absorbed by something else, and we don't, to your point, we don't get that access everywhere we'd like it to go.
Yeah, and I think it's also, when we're looking at Pennsylvania and we're kind of looking at the population shift where the center of Pennsylvania's population is moving to the southeast toward the Philadelphia suburbs, and we're also seeing a lot of rural types leaving either to the suburbs, to the cities, to elsewhere. So if, broadband is going to be a major consideration with that, I think, simply because it's a day-to-day basic thing you use in your life, and it's doubly so for any employers, where if you're reading through some of these public comments, you hear from businessmen who say, I wake up at 4 a.m. every day to place my shipping orders because I can't use the internet reliably at any other time.
Oh, wow.
And so, what's to keep that person and keep his job there rather than moving 40, 50 miles somewhere where he can get reliable internet. And I think that's one of those things that will, again, open up that chasm between rural Pennsylvania and urban Pennsylvania.
And to your point, real life impact on small businesses, on schools, emergency services, communities. This is not just a theoretical thing. This is something that there is an actual impact on the communities that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of explains where, especially if you're living in these areas, the anger there is palpable over this service that they pay a lot for and they get very little from. And this goes on for years and years and years. And this is a golden opportunity for Pennsylvania to come in and say, tomorrow will be different. This will not happen anymore. And if they squander that chance, it's just another failure for the rural areas.
And I think you said it best in one of your articles, broadband plans crucial for successful expansion.
Yes.
It's about the planning. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website lighthousetv.org for more information. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Anthony, first, thank you for joining us and for really just getting into this. This is such an important topic, but as we said earlier, it seems like a lot of inside baseball sometimes, and so I really appreciate you just giving clarity to our viewers on this. As you know, last segment, we always like to kind of get to know our guests beyond the talking point, and so one of the things that you've done a little more of in covering this story and some others is you've actually been traveling throughout the state, going to some of these hearings and meeting some of the people who are involved in this. So where have you been in Pennsylvania? And if you could pick one place, where was your favorite place you've been to in this state so far?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we're talking broadband, the first place I went was up north central PA around Wellsboro, Tioga area, which is beautiful. I mean, it kind of reminds me of where I grew up back in Ohio. And it kind of added a few tourism sites for me to come back. The Pennsylvania's Grand Canyon is up there. It's near Corning, New York, which I love that vintage glassware stuff. But I've been out around Lancaster a number of times, which is always nice. Earlier in the year, I made it all the way out to East Palestine in that area to report on the train derailment there. I don't know, it's nice where I've only been in Pennsylvania about three and a half years now. So it's a great opportunity for me just get a better sense of this Commonwealth and what it looks geographically, what the people are like. I think North Central Pennsylvania is definitely on the list. It's a big drive. It's a big drive from Philadelphia, but well worth it.
Yeah. How do these places compare to Philadelphia? Where does Philadelphia rank now in your tour across the state?
I mean, I think you get up to a place like Wellsboro, and then you look at Philadelphia, and you just think the opposite, essentially. I think what I really like about Pennsylvania is all these small towns, all these kind of former industrial or mill towns, they've really kept a certain character about them that you don't see in other states. You see a lot of places where you still have an intact downtown. They're surprisingly walkable, but it's also, it's very easy to get in and out of, except for Philadelphia, of course. I think it really brings out there's a unique character to Pennsylvania as it's changed from, a highly industrialized area. Agriculture is also still a huge one. I think it really shows there's so much variety, there's so much depth, there's so much beauty in Pennsylvania that I think people really miss out on.
Yeah, no, and to your point, it's so interesting because you talked about how different North Central PA is compared to where you are in Philadelphia, and that is just one of the interesting things about the state. I mean, different pockets of the state are so different from each other. And when you get to kind of tour the state, you get to kind of drive through all of that diversity. Another segment, another time. But any good eats along the way? Anything that you go, no, you got to go to this place and try that dish?
It's hard to say. Whenever I'm up around the Allentown area, I'm always trying to try, new Hispanic food I haven't had before or anything. Or, I used to live in Washington, D.C., and I love pupusas down there with that Salvadoran food. So whenever I'm up here, that's what I'm looking for. North Central PA or rural Pennsylvania, I'm looking for, these kind of holes in the wall, or not as much barbecue as it was when I lived down south. Just these random out-of-the-way places that you've never heard of, you won't see anywhere else. But still, it's good just drop in, if nothing else, see the decor, have some great different food. There's always something new.
If you're in Philly, it's the cheesesteak, right?
It's always the cheese. Philly, they have so much more than just the cheesesteak, though. You go up to Northeast Philly, there's a huge Slavic population up there. There's a huge Korean population. West Philly has great Ethiopian and other African food. There's more than just cheesesteak. People gotta look out more. There's so much richness there.
Anthony, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
My thanks to Anthony Hennen for joining us, and of course to each of you for tuning in, and we hope to see you again right back here next week. My name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.